Oklahoma is the land of second, third, and last chances. Who were the people that made it so? The Red River Institute of History, johnjdwyer.com, me, Gwin Faulconer-Lippert, and our signature sponsor, Atwood's Stores, present Oklahoma Gold. Together with our Will Rogers Medallion-winning author-historian John J. Dwyer, we'll stitch the golden threads of Oklahoma history. It's Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history by the stories we learn? John J. Dwyer, what's this story?
Gwin, on this episode of Oklahoma Gold, we explore one of the great mysteries of Oklahoma history. It's the saga of Karen Silkwood and Kerr McGee. Few Oklahomans now have even heard the name Karen Silkwood. Yet as acclaimed historical author and former Republican state legislator Kent Frates of Oklahoma City chronicled, quoting, "Her life and death triggered investigations by Congress and the FBI, a lengthy, contentious trial, and a public relations nightmare for Kerr McGee and the entire nuclear energy industry. Her story would also go on to be immortalized in the hit motion picture Silkwood," end quote. Well, there was a time, which you and I well recall, Gwin, when scarcely a person living within the boundaries of our state, and eventually millions living outside of it, were not well versed on that story. Yet now I found that polling a cross-section of Oklahomans will typically yield only a small percentage of people who even recognize the name Karen Silkwood, and a far smaller group still who have any familiarity with the story or its significance. To remedy that dilemma, at least for those of us listening to this program, let's go back to 1972, when following a broken marriage in Duncan, my hometown, native Texan Silkwood took a job in the metallography laboratory in the Kerr McGee, or KM, Nuclear Corporation's Cimarron plutonium plant near Crescent, north of Oklahoma City on State Highway 74 in Lincoln County. The company was a closely held subsidiary of parent corporation Kerr McGee, the giant that had helped build 20th century Oklahoman. The job parlayed Karen Silkwood's natural aptitude in chemistry into a job testing plutonium pellets and reactor rods. Plutonium emerged from uranium as a crucial element in the production of atomic weapons during America's grim post-World War II Cold War with the atheistic communist Russian-based Soviet Union. That struggle continued in the early 1970s. 13 pounds of plutonium or less could produce a nuclear bomb. By 1974, Silkwood was deeply troubled over what she considered dangerous mismanagement at the Cimarron plant. This involved false quality control evaluations, shipment of defective nuclear-related products that could lead to catastrophic accidents, and inadequate training and educating of plant workers about the life-threatening nature of the plutonium with which they worked. She also cringed at operational security so poor that plutonium, a few pounds of which could form a weapon of truly mass destruction, could be and was smuggled out of the plant more than once. Karen Silkwood was a deeply troubled woman personally as well. Life's blows and her own mistakes had conspired to transform the one-time high school good girl who didn't date much and was devoted to straight-A studies, playing musical instruments, and team sports participation. She had left her serial adulterer husband after 8 years of marriage and 3 children. Because he refused to quit his affairs or grant her a divorce, she made the mournful decision to leave without her children. She managed only to periodically keep them overnight. Still bright and passionate, though, she had grown increasingly nervous and now possessed suspect standards regarding alcohol, drugs, and sexual promiscuity. This led to an emotional relationship with KM coworker Drew Stevens and an attempted suicide in 1973 when they temporarily broke up. Amidst this draining personal life of Karen Silkwood, the Atomic Energy Commission twice shut down the Cimarron plant due to missing plutonium. In each case, The amount represented about 1/3 the amount required to make an atomic bomb. By November 1974, Silkwood, some fellow workers, and their national union all stood convinced of widespread KM wrongdoing at the plant. After attempting the dangerous task of securing irrefutable physical evidence, Silkwood correctly calculated that at least 40 pounds of plutonium were missing from the plant, enough to produce 3 nuclear bombs. Then, while experiencing growing hostility from the company, she herself tested positive for radioactive contamination. By now, even the Atomic Energy Commission, which possessed a close, friendly, and collaborative relationship with Kerr McGee, had met with KM management, urging the company to improve safety and security at its Cimarron plant near Crescent. And that commission had been disappointed in KM management's lack of both cooperation and corrective action. By November 1974, fueled by bitterness, suspicion, and fear, events at the tense and dangerous Cimarron nuclear plant had spiraled beyond anyone's ability to control. Then, while experiencing growing pressure and hostility from her employer, Silkwood herself tested positive for radioactive contamination repeatedly. The final time, much of her house was also contaminated, and her personal readings registered so high, KM and her employee union split the cost of flying her to the enormous Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory in New Mexico for more comprehensive testing. By now, emotions raged on all sides. KM workers, nervous and suspicious, some about their health, some about their job security, some about both, split into pro and anti-Silkwood camps. The company accused her of contaminating herself. Silkwood felt certain someone with KM was contaminating her, intending to intimidate and even eventually kill her with cancer. She believed that the unusual nature of her readings indicated she was internally affected in her lungs, but she forged ahead through illness, fear, and management intimidation. One friend swore in an affidavit that Silkwood told her following a union meeting in Crescent the evening of November 13, 1974, quote, "She said she had all the proof concerning falsification by KM of records. As she said this, she clenched her hand more firmly on the folder and notebook she was holding. She told me she was on her way to meet union attorney Steve Wadka and a New York Times reporter to give them this material," end quote. 7 miles south of Crescent, however, on smooth, straight, barren Highway 74, Silkwood's small car mysteriously crossed the highway, traveled straight down the opposite shoulder for a couple hundred feet, then crashed directly into a concrete culvert. She died instantly. Neither the folder nor the envelope were ever found.
So what records does Karen Silkwood think that Kerr McGee falsified?
False quality control evaluations, shipment of defective nuclear-related products that could lead to catastrophic accidents. They were sending dirty stuff out, and inadequate training and educating of plant workers about the life-threatening nature of the plutonium with which they work. So they had farm boys there working with grease under their hands. They would play around with the stuff like they would just an implement, and it was radioactive, and they didn't even really realize.
John J. Dwyer, I can hardly wait to hear the golden nugget. This is Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history by the story we revisit. Karen Silkwood and Kerr McGee, and we're just getting started. John J. Dwyer.
Well, Gwin, if high drama had gathered about Karen Silkwood during the final weeks of her life, historic conflict erupted in the weeks, months, and years following it. Her father, Bill Silkwood, hailed from Temple, Oklahoma. He flew 2 combat tours as a B-17 bombardier in Europe during World War II, and he filed a personal injury suit on behalf of his daughter's 3 children in the U.S. District Court in Oklahoma City in 1977. By then, KM Kerr McGee had long since shuttered its disgraced Cimarron plant, with enough plutonium still arguably missing to construct several nuclear bombs. Bill Silkwood's suit alleged that KM officers, including Dean McGee, as well as the FBI, had violated his daughter's and other Cimarron plant employees' free speech and other civil rights, including when she was supposedly run off the road and killed, whether intentionally or accidentally, and used unwarranted listening devices and wiretaps against them. That was the accusation. The state's judicial, medical, and law enforcement organizations, along with KM, insisted that Silkwood went to sleep at the wheel of her car while under the influence of drugs. Independent investigations, including probing work by prominent Oklahoma City attorney Jim Eichert, cast grave doubt on that theory. They also produced intelligence suggesting that the FBI was suppressing information related to the accident and indicating that another vehicle had forced Silkwood off the road. This included the claim that despite Silkwood's death officially occurring due to a single car front-end collision with a concrete embankment, that scrape marks were present on the rear of Silkwood's car from another car that friends and family of hers insisted were not present before the accident. The 1979 Oklahoma City trial spawned worldwide headlines. It was the longest Oklahoma civil court battle in history and one of the most dramatic. The Silkwood team included Eichert and was led by famed criminal attorney Jerry Spence. They called forth KM department heads who described the Cimarron plutonium plant as, quote, one big pig pen, end quote. They called world-renowned nuclear authorities, and they had Spence's legendary prowess with juries. He lasered in on KM's guilt of strict liability with an abnormally dangerous substance, where, the ruling went, only injury and not negligence had to be proven. The jury decisively sided with the Silkwoods, awarding them millions of dollars in damages. Years of appeals that twice reached the United States Supreme Court resulted in a $1.38 million out-of-court KM settlement to the estate in 1986. An elderly, ill Bill Silkwood accepted the offer and the vindication for his daughter that it suggested. KM admitted no wrongdoing. Sadly, KM Nuclear's checkered history of managerial incompetence, environmental disaster, and damage to many human lives in numerous states through the normally honorable and efficient nuclear industry tarnished the legacy of its great founder, who had done so much for Oklahoma. If not for a tiny Duncan resident with a deeply troubled personal life, these would likely have been isolated incidents, lost in the mists of history. And in closing, Gwin, I'll offer a personal remembrance. When I interviewed with Kerr McGee my senior year at OU in 1978, years after Karen Silkwood's death, but years before the Oscar-winning motion picture that immortalized her, I experienced the most memorable interview of my career. The sharp tweed coat-wearing KM engineer interviewer wanted to discuss exclusively what a malcontent and troublemaker Karen Silkwood was, and how wrongly KM had been characterized by the national media. The company, he protested to me, a 21-year-old OU senior, the entire interview was nothing like its vicious image. Like numerous of my peers, I knew and cared little at the time about the Silkwood affair, and had entered my KM interview excited to learn more about a company I held in awe, and whose gas stations had graced many an Oklahoma street corner from my earliest remembrance. We all left our separate but quite similar KM appointments, however, with one thought. What did these people do that was so bad that they are trying so hard to cover it up? Indeed, Gwin, still I wonder, was Kerr McGee valiantly attempting to defend its hard-won honor and that of the state it had done so very much to build from those with dishonorable means and purposes? Or were the wicked protesting, as the old Bible verse says, way too much?
In the Oklahomans, too, are there QR codes?
Yes, there are, and there's a much expanded version of this story on there.
Now that's Oklahoma Gold.